Hello and welcome to a new episode of Once Upon a TV Time, the podcast that takes a look behind the scenes of some of the best shows on TV. I'm your host, Marine Perot. I'm a freelance journalist and TV critic, and on each episode of this podcast, I chat with someone who worked or works on the shows we discuss. Writers, directors, actors, craftsmen and women, you name it, they stop by to talk about what makes great TV and to tell us what goes on beyond our screens. This new episode of Once Upon a TV Time dives into a show that will be returning to Prime Video in November this year. A show that premiered on Amazon's streaming platform in 2022 and focuses on one of the most beloved worlds ever created in the fantasy genre. Developed by J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, it is based on the appendices of the novel The Lord of the Rings, written by J.R.R. Tolkien and published in 1954. Ladies and gents, and everyone in between, let's talk about The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. This series takes place in the Second Age, thousands of years before the story of Frodo, his fellowship, and their journey to Mordor. And it focuses on various major characters in the world of Tolkien. So who's here with me today to talk about the Rings of Power? Well, someone who has everything to do with setting up the scene for the show and helping it to come alive. Set decorator Tina Jones. Tina is an Emmy-winning set decorator whose work has been previously seen on Game of Thrones, Spider-Man Far From Home, Aladdin, King Arthur, and Assassin's Creed. Tina, welcome, and thank you for joining me. How are you today?
Yes, very well, thank you. Yeah, looking forward to talking to you, yeah.
Yes, I'm very excited to talk to you too. It's funny because the last podcast episode I did was with a production designer. So it's a nice segue into
yeah. Yeah, because we do work very closely together. It's a really important relationship. I always find, especially if I'm working with a designer for the first time, you've got a finite number of hours really to sort of try and get into their head, because obviously they're wanted by all sorts of departments and directors, and so you really need to try and find out what their preferences are, colours, textures, and you have to do that sort of quite quickly so you can just get started and get your teeth into the job. If you've worked with a designer before, you've already often got a shorthand to what they like and what they don't like.
Yeah, so to begin with, can you tell me what is it exactly that a set decorator does?
Well, I always liken it to the production designer being the client and the set decorator being like the interior designer. And so the production designer will sit down with me and go through sets and be very particular about what they are expecting to see, what they want to see, the type of mood they want to portray. And this is often after they've had lots of conversations with the director. So from the very get-go, you really have to sort of get as much information as you can in a very little time, because they're just at that stage of pre-production, they're always being called into other departments and meetings. So I always find it's best to try and concentrate on the big sets first, and the big, especially on a show like Game of Thrones or like Rings of Power, concentrating on some of the big prop makes that I know that I'm going to have to be involved in, so I can start getting those concepted. So it's a really important relationship because it sets the pace for the whole show, really. If you don't get that understanding of what they want, it can make it incredibly difficult, which luckily it's never happened to me, but I have heard of that happening on other shows. And so it's a relationship where you're covering everything: textures, colours, conversations they've had with directors and actors, producers, any little bits of information that you can get. You've really got to sort of soak it all up, like a sponge, really, right at the beginning.
You mentioned liking it to an interior designer, so I'm thinking, would it be fair to say that like the production designer is the one who imagines what a space would look like, and then you come in and add the touch that make it real, and then
Yes.
you're like the link between the person who imagines it and the person who's actually putting the stuff in
Yes.
place.
I mean, one designer I always work a lot with, she says that my analogy is completely incorrect. She doesn't agree with it at all because she said, you know, you often come forward with ideas that she hasn't had. And that's true, you do. But I always think to simplify it to the layman, it just gives a rough idea of what we do. But it's a lot deeper than that because
Yeah.
often the designer will have been completely engrossed with the building and design of the architecture. And then you come in and say, especially with a contemporary job, you know, why don't we do it this color? Why don't we have the combination of these
Mhm.
textures and these patterns, this type of wallpaper? And so you're bringing far more to the table than probably they would have ever imagined. So it
Yeah.
really depends on the designer. It depends very much on the show that you're working on, you know, how much you contribute and how much the designer already has preconceived ideas of how they want it to look.
So what made you want to become a set decorator, and how did you get to the point where you are today in your career?
I trained as a fine artist, so I knew I wanted to be creative, and I used to paint very big paintings. So my first foray into film and television was as an assistant scenic painter, which I didn't actually last very long. I mean, it was incredibly, it wasn't, yeah, it just wasn't for me, climbing up scaffold towers and painting like little clouds on backdrops. It didn't sort of really fulfill the creativity. And then one day I was on a particular set painting a backdrop and I saw a lady with a clipboard and she was walking around the room and pointing and people were moving furniture and I asked, what does that lady do? And they said she's a set decorator. And I thought, oh, that looks quite interesting. But how I actually first got into film and television was I I knew that my paintings were not going to translate into the domestic interior, and somebody suggested to me, why don't you go into film and television? So I did a postgraduate film production course in Bournemouth, and then when I graduated from there, I was obviously looking for work, and somebody was asking for a painter to paint a container which was going to take film equipment out to Vietnam to rebuild the film industry. And I thought, oh, I'll do that. So I basically, for nothing, it was just a sort of charitable thing. I organised other painters to come and paint with me. We painted these containers, and then the guy who organised it said, would you like a job? And so that led to my very first film. It was a film called Let Him Have It, which was directed by Peter Medak at Pinewood Studios. And yeah, that was incredible because that sort of gave me the taste of what it could really be like working on a film crew or working with a film crew. And that's how it happened, really. It was just pure chance of being in the right place, I think, at the right time.
What advice would you give to someone who is interested in that field? What are some of the skills that they should have?
I think inquisitive, to be enthusiastic about life and research. My job involves a huge amount of research, which isn't or shouldn't be just sitting on a computer. It should be going out and looking at galleries, looking at museums, looking at the quality of fabrics, you know, that were maybe from 200 years ago. Just reading a lot, watching a lot of documentaries. I do watch a lot of documentaries because I find that gives me an insight into real life. I do watch a lot of films and TV drama too, but I don't want to ever be influenced too much by something that I'm watching because I think that could be quite easily done. You know, that you see, oh, that's a nice combination of colours and let's do that on the next show. So I think my advice would be to really persevere. It's a very difficult industry to get into because obviously there's a lot of people that want to do it, but just be open to working long hours, being anywhere that's required at sort of 6 o'clock in the morning if you need to, and just being inquisitive and enthusiastic. I think enthusiasm is really important.
Your career involves credits on movies and TV shows such as Game of Thrones, Aladdin, King Arthur, Assassin's Creed, and of course The Rings of Power. There is a trend in there of fantasy world. Is that a genre that you enjoy working in more than others?
Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. I think when I when I think back to my childhood, I was always creating these sort of like little magical kingdoms, whether it was under a table or whether it was sort of deep in a hedge in the garden. I was always very inquisitive again, and enjoyed creating somewhere that maybe the cat could sleep, that had sort of fake chandeliers. And so I do enjoy contemporary as well, but always at the end of a contemporary job, I just think, right, give me a fantasy. I want another fantasy, because your imagination just runs wild. You can actually just really go into the characters and create all sorts of wonderful props and set dressing.
So you won an Emmy for
Yes,
your work on Game of Thrones. Specifically, it was for the season 2 episode Garden of Bones.
yes.
What did that award mean to you?
It's incredible to be nominated or to be awarded for something, by your peers, as a recognition of them seeing the hard work and the creativity that's gone into that production. So it was very exciting, but I think it's lovely to be recognized. It's fantastic. But the job is so wonderful that it doesn't matter. Going to
Mhm.
work is an award almost, because you're just so lucky to be doing such an incredible job. And I think now I've been in the industry probably nearly 40 years, but it doesn't seem like that, because every single day is different and every production is very different as well.
Yeah, I guess the job in itself is rewarding enough.
Yes, it's incredible.
What memory do you keep from your time on Game of Thrones?
Um, Well, working in Ireland was an amazing experience. It was fantastic. And the people, I think it was probably one of the first jobs where I created a lot of props and we made furniture. And that was a very exciting part of the job for me, because I think prior to that, I don't think many of the films had the budget to allow for that, or even the ambition. Game of Thrones was incredibly ambitious. And it was funny because I could have done more. I could have gone on to another series, but I always felt that it wasn't a good thing in my career to do a second season of something. Once you've done one, it felt right to be able to step away and say, okay, someone else can do the next one, until I came to Rings of Power. And that for me was such an amazing adventure that I wanted to do the next one. So that was really, it didn't follow the pattern that I had sort of laid down after Game of Thrones.
I promise you, the Middle Earth is healed, and its people see what you and I did here. All our sufferings will be worth it. Our sufferings. You must know it pains me. Treating you like...
Like you've treated countless others.
like Morgoth treated me. Do you know what it is to be tortured at the hands of a god?
I cannot imagine.
So you joined the Rings of Power for season 2.
Yeah.
So tell me, how did you get on board that show?
I was doing a lovely film for Paramount at the time, and somebody said to me, "Oh, did you hear that Rings of Power was coming to the UK?" And just thinking back to the memories of Game of Thrones and obviously Aladdin that had been recent in my mind, I just thought, oh, I'd love to do that. So I actually it was the first time probably in my career that I actually made a conscious effort of trying to find out who the designer was and just saying, can I put my name in the hat, please? Because, I'd really like to do it. So I was very lucky that Christian at the time was looking for a set decorator, and then the rest is history. It was we met, got on, and yeah, I did season 2 with him.
So the Rings of Power is the story of Galadriel, Sauron, Elrond, Prince Durin, Gandalf, and many, many other characters before the adventures depicted in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But the world of Middle-earth already has a very established visual aesthetic in the minds of fans, whether it is from the Peter Jackson movies that came out in the early 2000s or even the books and countless illustrations that were made around that. So what is it like to work on a project of this scale that very much carries a set of visual expectations?
It's actually very difficult, and you you do have to keep reminding yourself of the fans and the people that are going to be watching it, because I think it's very easy, especially on a fantasy production, to go off on a tangent and really not consider what has made that story so successful. And so you do have to pay respect to what has gone before, but at the same time you do have a lot of leeway in where you are taking the designs. We were very, very lucky actually, because when we started season 2, the crews in New Zealand had put together some fabulous lookbooks for us, which had helped us with the textures and what the elves, the colours they used, and the colours that were used by the dwarves. And these are the sort of rules of the aesthetic in the world that they're living in. And of course, there is so much written about the Lord of the Rings books. And so it was, I wouldn't say it was easy, but it just made it a lot of research, and it made it much more satisfying to what you came to at the end. We would always put on presentations for the showrunners to make sure that all the props we were manufacturing or key things that we were making, that it all fell within what their vision was as well. So it was not only Christian's, but it was also the showrunner's vision and what they were expecting to see.
And so, as you mentioned, the first season was shot in New Zealand, and then the production moved to the UK for season 2. That's when you came on board. Like you said, the crew in New Zealand sent you materials to help you, but you guys had not seen the show when you started working on season 2, right? So, it sounds wild to me, because it's not to have been able to see what it actually looked like on screen. So what was it like to join when the show was already one season in, and you had to keep on creating on something that you didn't really know? You had materials, but you didn't really know what it looked like on the screen.
We obviously had a lot of props and that were sent over as well. So you could often work out from what was sent and what the guidelines for each world, you could roughly work out what sort of, but I think season 2, we were creating so many new sets that it didn't actually affect us too much. I remember for me, I think the most important one was the dressing of the horses. I needed to see how they were dressed. So they did show me like little tiny clips of what they'd shot of the horses, so that I could take notes about, how the saddles were and colours and things. But yeah, it wasn't as difficult as it actually sounds. I think people that work in film and television are very adaptable. We have to be, because time is often of the essence. So you have to make it as easy and as simple as you can. So as soon as they said, we're not going to show you anything, sorry, you can't see it, it was like, oh, okay, well, we'll work it out another way. So, but like I say, there were so many new sets that it didn't actually affect us too much.
That's true. Season 2 moves a lot into new territory.
Elrond.
My heart sings to see you, old friend.
You tidal-haired, flowery-tongued flagpole.
Tidal-haired?
Mm-hmm. You've got some sand coming here.
If there's one thing that I've learned doing this podcast, is that filmmaking it's a collaborative process. So you're part of the art department, and I'd like to ask you about your collaboration with production designer Christian Milstead, who you've mentioned before. How does that collaboration work?
Very, very well with Christian. I mean, I think with season 2, we'd obviously never worked with each other before, but he made me feel like he completely trusted what we were doing. But I passed everything in front of him. So we would make prototypes of certain pieces of furniture. He would be shown concepts, and for hand props. I work really closely with the prop master, who's actually my husband as well. So he's got to do what I say most of the time. But he was making all the props, but set deck, we were concepting them. They would then get passed to Christian. He would tweak them, make a few changes, and then we would get approval from the showrunners and director. And then we would often make prototypes. So Christian, very quickly, I think, in season 2, him and I sort of got to know each other and how we worked. And so I could anticipate the things that he was going to like and what he didn't like. And we had a really good, close relationship with the art department, and even more so actually in the last season, because we were much closer together physically, whereas before we were in 2 different buildings. And he allows us, set deck, a particular freedom, but that's because he trusts us. He knows that we're going to deliver to him exactly what he wants. And obviously there would be the odd time when you had to sort of tweak something or change something before it went on the set. But I think it was a very good working relationship.
And so in terms of your collaboration with your husband, the
Yeah.
props master, how does that work as well? Is it a matter of like you talk with Christian and there's this set and you're gonna need this amount of furniture, this amount of props, and then you go to the props master and say, here's a list of what we need? Or
Yes.
is it much more everybody is involved at the same time?
If I was to run through very quickly and simply, this is very simplified. But so what I would do was very early on, I would sit down with Christian and we would talk about key sets. Then I would go back and sit down with my production buyer and often John, my prop master, and we would talk through exactly what was required in these sets, how big they were, if there was any special action of furniture being broken or smashed, or did we need repeats or did it have to be scale? And then we would work out sort of how long we needed to maybe buy or to hire. We usually either purchased or made the furniture, and then we would hire smaller pieces that were maybe not going to be repeated again. And then my senior assistant set decorators would go and source a lot of these props. And I would give them details about how they should look, what the colors were, how many we needed. So they would go out and find those items. And we would go to antique fairs, antique markets, find them through private dealers. We also shipped a lot from India. We found fabrics. We went on a sort of fabric buying trip to Florence and Rome. And so it comes from all over the place. And then we would make up mood boards, which then get showed to Christian, first of all, to say, this is what we're thinking of putting in this particular set. And we would have a discussion about that, though we'd remove anything he didn't like and the things he did like. And then that's basically how we put it together. And so from that, the prop master can see exactly how many things he has to make, what the size of the crew needs to be. Production buyer can also work out how much she's needing to budget for that particular set. So yes, you're right. It's an incredibly collaborative process. And you've got to keep it moving swiftly and smoothly because all these other people around you are relying on the information that I give to them. But it's very different depending on what size job you are. So if, for example, if you're on a contemporary film, it would be a completely different process, but roughly following the same lines.
Yeah, the Rings of Power is famously a very big production.
Yes.
And it's interesting what you're saying about sourcing certain materials, certain props, because on a fantasy show, as a viewer, to me it all looks coming from a fantasy world. So I'm not, I'm not imagining, like I'm not seeing, oh, maybe these drapes come from Italy or maybe this table comes from India, so it's very interesting to hear that some props are real and they exist in the world and not just in the world of Middle Earth.
Yes, it might be also that you find a very unique one piece in an antique market, but you might need, for example, for the Elven boathouse, which we saw in season 2, you might need a series of beautiful benches. And so you think, okay, well, if we can make another 12 of these, and slightly alter the legs. So it's often not just using the piece that you've made. You'll often change it or put metal brass details around it just to make it look that bit more special.
What is the thing that you enjoy the most about being a set decorator on this particular show?
I think it was, well, the scripts were amazing, and they just gave you so much room for being very creative. And every single episode, there was something new that had to be built or drawn up or designed. And I found it incredibly exciting because you're working with people that are very passionate about it, and I think that sort of rubs off on you whether you're a fan or not. You want their face to light up when you're showing them something that they've written down as letters on a page, but you've actually produced it and sort of made it there in their hands in 3 dimensions. So it sort of rubs off on you, really, that enthusiasm.
So I want to talk about a few specific sets that we saw in season 2. I particularly enjoyed everything that had to do with the storyline between Celebrimbor and Anatar. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about the behind the scenes of building the forge in Eregion.
Well, the forge was really the sort of it became the epicenter of Middle-earth's corruption. And so that was such a fabulous set, cathedral-like, and yeah, even standing inside it, you actually thought, wow, this is incredible. We completely redesigned the ring making machine, which was really, really fabulous fun. Again, it sort of took those cathedral shapes that you saw in the big fire of the forge and the windows. So that really just shows that collaboration with the art department, because from their concepts and their drawing, it was just very evident, this lovely arch shape that they had everywhere, that it just made sense that, our table was a reflection of that. And we did a lot of research into how you would have made a ring in medieval times, because again, you can't populate this set with furniture unless you understand how these things would be made, even though it's fantasy. So John and I actually went on a ring making weekend and sort of made rings the old-fashioned way of hammering them on a bench. And yeah, it was exciting from beginning to end, really. When you saw those that set going up, it was like, wow, how are we going to? You just had to be very aware of the scale of it as well, because you couldn't put a tiny little table in there. So everything had to be sort of fairly hefty in scale.
When it comes to Eregion and the forge, you got to create it and build it up, but then you had to destroy it.
Yeah.
How is it also to create that destruction?
It's almost like a completely different set, because people imagine you're just going to smash your props up, but of course you can't do that because it's not always shot in that order. And so we had to make broken versions of a lot of it. And yeah, that it was like creating a completely different set, a new set, because you had to imagine that some of these pieces had fallen from a vast cathedral roof above you. But was still exciting. I think it looked fantastic, actually. I think they did a really brilliant job.
And another one that you got to create that is part of the Lord of the Rings lore but had never been seen on screen before is Tom Bombadil's cabin. And Tom Bombadil as a character had never been in any of the movies or anything like that. Tell me about creating that set and what that set says about the character.
It was meant to be in a desert. So we sort of we did a bit of research into sort of nomadic desert life and the Bedouins and how they used things, or we imagined you would use things that you'd found in the desert. So that sort of led to us finding a great supplier of sort of weather-beaten, sun-bleached wood, which, believe it or not, there is somebody who specializes in that sort of wood, which comes from all over the world. And then we found a lady in Cornwall who actually made furniture using driftwood that she found on the beach. So we thought, well, that's the sort of thing you would do. You would find a dried, gnarled tree, and you'd probably use it to try and make something with that had maybe the arms of the chair, could be the jaws of an animal that had died in the drought in the desert. So everything we imagined he could have found or made himself. Yeah, that was a lovely set actually. It looked beautiful. And in fact, really, I would say all of the sets that we shot in season 2, when you walked into them, it almost felt like you were there. Because often
Mhm.
you can sometimes walk onto a set and it's a set. But this, I think his set as well, with all the candles lit, and we found some lovely antique fabric that had been printed and made by hand, and so that was sort of hanging up over one of the doorways. Yeah, and we also got a potter to make a lovely hedgehog teapot that was in the background. So there's all these little things that you really only
I
saw
love
if you
that.
looked.
Every time I see these, yeah, especially in the last episode, you have this shot where he's like pouring tea in that kettle. Like I was like, I want that teapot. No,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful set. And speaking of like the grandeur of those sets, the one that strikes me perhaps the most is Casa Doom. Like how much of that is a set and how much of that is special effects? Because when you look at it, it looks so vast and so impressive that it's one of those when I see it on screen, I have a hard time wrapping my head around.
It is an extremely big set, actually. It is a big set. It was quite usual to walk onto that set and get lost, and which is the way out. I just remember always thinking, well, which way do I go? You sort of completely lost idea of which was north and which was south. That it was very, very big. Also, it was a wonderful, I think this is another reason, again, of many reasons why it's such a fabulous show to work on, is that we had to consider a lot of scale in Khazad-dûm because they're dwarfs, and so all the furniture we made had to be much bigger than if it came into contact with other like elves. You had to do two scales, and so that was a wonderful challenge because you had to get it right, and everything in there was meant to be made of stone. Or we also looked into it, and they would have also had, if they had wood, it would be petrified wood that was obviously sort of deep in the ground that they would have mined, and so very straight edges. You don't see round things. Everything is very sort of hard edged. And yeah, that was a fabulous set as well, actually. But they're all fabulous. That's the difficulty.
I think I recall somebody saying that the elves were Art Nouveau and the dwarfs were
Art Deco. I mean, that was sort of how I used to. It was a very simplified way of trying to understand the design, and for me to then say to my assistants when they were going out and looking and
Mhm.
sourcing fabrics, for example, just to always think of the dwarves as being Art Deco, which essentially is this sort of square line, a lot of square lines and shapes. And then the Art Nouveau is more based on sort of natural, not William Morris, but the sort of more ethereal sort of natural designs, organic, which, going right back to one of your first questions about advice for young people, that's why I think it's really important for them to go to museums and just learn the difference in all of those styles, because they will often be, their argument would be, well, I can look it up, but actually it's just about seeing it in the flesh, Art Nouveau and Georgian and Victorian, and just knowing all the difference really between each
Yeah,
style.
absolutely.
Now let the song begin, let us sing together. The sun, the stars, moon and mist, rain and cloudy weather, light on the budding leaf, dew on the feather, wind on the open hill, bells on the heather. Old Tom Bombadil is a merry fellow, bright blue his jacket is, and his boots are yellow. Reeds by the shady pool, lilies on the water, old Tom Bombadil and the little daughter.
I'm always fascinated by the level of details in the set. I've visited some sets before, and when you are in them, it's interesting to see how much detail there is that you don't catch when you're watching the show. And that is in part because it needs to look good for the story, for the actors that are acting in that space, and it also helps tell the story. But I'm wondering if there's like, how do you decide how much to put? Because you obviously you have budget constraints and all that. So like, when do you go, okay, that's enough, we don't need to have like little carvings in this wall? Or when do you say, no, we need it all?
Yeah, you very rarely say that's enough because you can always take it away, but it's harder to add it if on the day somebody, decides that they want more. When I first decided that I wanted to be a set decorator, it's not something you immediately go into. You obviously have to make your way up through other sort of departments. And so I did spend a few years as a standby art director, who is obviously on the floor with the camera, which was really valuable for me because I learnt what was important in front of the camera and what wasn't important. And I also learnt and saw actors' reactions to what was put before them. So it's incredibly helpful if in the script it says that he opens the drawer, that he has the drawer exactly dressed as it would be and not just full of, old pieces of paper, random pieces of paper. And so it was a really good exercise for me to know exactly what we should be dressing on the set, whether it be for the camera and the design and aesthetic of the set, but also for the actors, because it would just help them. I mean, like, for example, if you have a cupboard and nobody at all is ever going to go to that cupboard, it would be pointless to dress it. But if you had a lot of background action, but nobody specifically going to that cupboard, I would say to them, let's dress it, because one of the background extras might say, oh, well, I'll walk to the cupboard and take a blanket. So it does very much depend on the scene and the show and what the set is, how much and how far you go. But I don't think you can go too far, really, unless it's you have a constraint of time or something, if you're sort of dressing and you've only got a couple of hours.
No, but that makes a lot of sense though. Like, 'cause it's like I said, like you mentioned that example of like an actor opening a drawer. You
Yeah.
might not see the drawer and its contents on camera as the viewer, but like you said, it's important for the actor that it's not empty or that it's not full of random stuff.
Yes,
So
yeah. I mean,
makes
for
sense.
example, with Calibrimbo's bureau and his desk, all of those drawers would have been filled with relevant things to him. So that, because again, he might use it as part of his scene, even though it's not scripted, he might. So you would definitely do a principals. If they were sitting at a desk, you would do all of those drawers.
Yeah. Wow. We are not going to dive into spoilers on season 3, but I know that you've worked on it. It's coming out at the end of the year, and I'm just curious to know, are there any particular things that you've worked on for season 3 that you are really excited for the audience to see?
There's many things, actually. There's a lot. And so it's very hard for me to sort of talk about season 2 and not talk about season 3 because I think it's more exciting than season 2. And there's a lot of new things coming up, which I think the fans will absolutely love. We certainly loved doing them and making them, and it's very hard for me not to talk about it because obviously it is really exciting. But all I can say is, there's something very new and exciting which is coming.
I will say, so we know from like synopsis that's been released that we'll see Sauron forging the One Ring. We also saw him at the end of season 2 keep Celebrimbor's hammer. So I'm pretty curious to see that new forge of his. I have a feeling it's not going to be as warm.
Well, you'll have to tune in and see. It is pretty epic, though, I've got to say.
I'm excited to see that. Well, Tina, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
No, thank you for having me. It's really lovely. Thanks, Marine.
It's the end of this episode of Once Upon a TV Time. Thank you so much for listening. Tina Jones, thank you very much for visiting Middle-earth with me. If you're interested in seeing Tina's work on the show, go check out The Rings of Power on Prime Video, returning in November of this year with its 3rd season. Folks, I will be back soon with a new episode of Once Upon a TV Time and a new guest. Stay tuned, follow this podcast on social media for all the details, leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcast, and until then, go watch some television.